brief period of time, we Catkillers were allowed to become a part of that long, unwavering tradition of warriors and join the Brotherhood of the Corps, and we were all the better for it. My original intent, rather than to write a book, was to provide a written account of my tour so that my grandchildren might find out what Gramps did in Vietnam. Over the years, memories of the events I had seen and experienced in Vietnam continued to percolate. I became convinced the unit I had served in was unique, and the stories I had been telling my buddies needed to be told to a wider audience. What intrigued me was not human conflict per se, but the very human humor, pride, compassion, fear, grief, and, yes, love that swirl around us, no matter what the circumstances. What I remember is how combat seemed to evoke these emotions in quite surprising ways. Everything I experienced from July 1967 to July 1968, I experienced through the lens of the emotions that bind us as human beings. This is my story and the story of the men I flew with, the Marines we supported, and the things I experienced. I loved what I did, and every day was another opportunity to directly influence the safety of Marines on the ground. Nothing else mattered. Everything I have written is true and accurate to the best of my recollection, with the exception of a few names and call signs that I could not recall. The dialogue I have quoted is accurate in general, but not exactly as stated nearly 50 years ago. Some listeners may find what I write about difficult to believe or understand. After a few months in country, I couldn't believe some of it either. At one point, I attempted to read Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22. I got about 80 pages into it, then put it down, thinking, why in the world am I reading this? Hell, I'm living it. Chapter 1. A Fear of Flying. I grew up in the small town of Port Angeles, Washington, located on the Olympic Peninsula about 60 miles west of Seattle. My parents divorced when I was 6, and my mother remarried when I was 12. My stepfather had been a B-24 flight engineer in World War II. He was shot down over Germany and spent nearly 2 years as a prisoner of war, POW. I had trouble accepting him as a substitute for my real father, and we did not get along very well. My stepfather was interested in aviation and owned several light aircraft over the years. He tried to share his love of flying with me, but I was too immature and stubborn to accept it. Had I listened to him, I could have had my private pilot license at 17 years old, most likely been the envy of all my pals, and caught the attention of some of the girls in high school. He tried his best to get me interested in flying. He even had one of his World War II fighter pilot buddies taking me up in his Aranca Champ for my first flight. Instead of taking it easy, so I could become accustomed to the wonders of flight, he took it upon himself to impress me with steep turns, stalls, and a couple of spins. All that did was scare the hell out of me, and he seemed to think it was funny. I was convinced he had done it to me on purpose. After that, my stepfather couldn't get me near one of his airplanes. Feelings of not measuring up spilled over into other aspects of my growing up. I shunned playing sports in school because I was afraid I wouldn't be good enough. I discovered I could get by academically without really applying myself. Avoiding challenges and barely getting by became my credo. I was what some would call an underachiever. I wasn't lazy. If something didn't come easily, I tended to avoid risk and direct my attention elsewhere. This lack of motivation didn't really catch up with me until college. I wound up at Seattle University in Seattle, Washington, unprepared to study. The good Jesuits actually gave me 2 opportunities over the next 3 years to perform, but the only thing I managed decent passing grades in was the 2-year mandatory Army Reserve Officers Training Corps, ROTC program. At jobs between my 2 failing years at Seattle University, I had set chokers for a logging operation near my hometown of Port Angeles